You have swallowed so many words that they have formed a stone in your chest. Each time you chose silence over truth, each moment you bit your tongue to preserve an artificial calm, you added weight to a burden you were never meant to carry. The act of withholding what needs to be said creates a peculiar kind of violence, one directed inward rather than outward, corroding you from within, while the world sees only your accommodating smile. Consider how often you have convinced yourself that retreat is wisdom. You tell yourself that rising above petty disputes demonstrates maturity, that allowing disrespect to pass unchallenged proves your spiritual evolution. Yet beneath these noble justifications lies something less flattering, something you would prefer not to examine too closely. The truth is that what you call enlightened restraint often amounts to nothing more than paralysis dressed in philosophical clothing. This pattern did not begin with you. The impulse to glorify passivity stretches back through centuries of moral teaching, winding through the foundations of how entire civilizations learned to conceptualize goodness itself. A German thinker in the 19th century traced this phenomenon to its source, revealing a disturbing origin story for the values that still govern how you move through the world. What he discovered was that much of what you consider virtuous emerged not from strength or nobility, but from the desperate strategies of those who lacked power. Picture a distant time when physical dominance shaped social reality with brutal directness. Those who possessed strength celebrated their own vitality without apology or shame. They valued courage, assertiveness, the willingness to impose their will upon their circumstances. Their morality flowed naturally from their capacity to act, to shape events, to claim space in the world. They called themselves good because they embodied the life force in its most undeniable form. But alongside these powerful figures existed others who could not compete in this realm of direct confrontation. They lacked the physical prowess, the social position, or the psychological fortitude to assert themselves through open challenge. Faced with their own impotence, they performed an extraordinary psychological maneuver. Unable to win according to the existing rules, they rewrote the entire game. What had been considered admirable became redefined as reprehensible. Strength transformed into brutality, confidence into arrogance, self-assertion into selfishness. Meanwhile, the qualities born of powerlessness, submission, obedience, the inability to fight back, were elevated to the highest moral status. Meekness became a virtue, not because it reflected any genuine spiritual insight, but because it was all the powerless had to offer. They made necessity into nobility. This inversion represented an act of collective self-preservation disguised as ethical evolution. By declaring that the meek would inherit the earth, by insisting that the last would be first, those without worldly power claimed a different kind of victory. They could not defeat the strong in physical combat, so they waged war in the realm of moral judgment instead. They crowned themselves the true winners by changing the criteria for winning. The remarkable thing is how thoroughly this reversal succeeded. The value system created by the powerless became the dominant moral framework across vast stretches of human civilization. What began as a defensive strategy became internalized as universal truth. Generation after generation absorbed these teachings, each child learning that confrontation marks you as uncivilized. That assertion reveals moral failure, that the highest human achievement is the ability to endure mistreatment with grace. You inherited this framework, whether you wanted it or not. From your earliest years, you absorbed messages that coded conflict as dangerous and accommodation as noble. Adults praised you when you shared your toys, even though you did not want to, when you apologized even though you felt no genuine remorse, when you remained quiet while others spoke over you. You learned that love and approval flow toward those who make themselves smaller, who suppress their wants, who prioritize the comfort of others above their own integrity. The conditioning runs so deep that you no longer recognize it as conditioning. It feels like your own authentic moral sense telling you that speaking up would be petty, that defending your boundaries would be selfish. that asserting your needs would burden others unfairly. You experience your trained compliance as personal virtue rather than seeing it for what it actually is, a fear response wrapped in ethical language. This confusion serves a purpose. When you believe that your passivity reflects enlightened choice rather than learned helplessness, you remain trapped while thinking yourself free. You become the perfect citizen of a system that requires your silence, your accommodation, your willingness to absorb mistreatment without complaint. The genius of this moral programming is that it makes you its own enforcer, policing your own impulses towards self-defense before anyone else needs to intervene. What happens to the energy you suppress each time you swallow your truth? Where does the force of your genuine response go when you refuse to let it emerge? The life within you that wants to push back, to say no, to draw a line, that vital impulse does not simply evaporate when you deny it expression. It remains inside you, searching for somewhere to go, transforming into something else entirely, something corrosive and self-consuming that will demand its due in ways you cannot predict or control. The suppressed energy does not disappear. It turns back upon itself, becoming a slow poison that seeps through every corner of your inner life. When your impulse to respond meets an internal wall of prohibition, when your desire to assert yourself collides with your fear of consequences, the collision produces a particular psychological toxin. This substance has a name that captures its corroding nature: resentment. Resentment emerges from the gap between what you want to do and what you allow yourself to do. You stand before someone who disrespects you, and every fiber of your being wants to speak, to push back, to establish that you will not tolerate such treatment. But the programming kicks in, the fear takes hold, and you remain silent. The words die in your throat. The energy meant for action gets dammed up inside you, and in that stagnant pool, bitterness begins to breed. The resentful person is always someone who wanted to act, but could not summon the courage. They carry within them the ghost of the response they should have given, the boundary they should have drawn, the truth they should have spoken. These phantom actions haunt them, replaying endlessly in private mental theaters where they always say the perfect thing, where they finally stand up for themselves, where they win the argument they surrendered in reality. What makes resentment particularly insidious is how it disguises itself as moral elevation. Unable to acknowledge your own fear, you construct elaborate justifications for your passivity. You tell yourself that you chose not to respond because you are more mature than your antagonist, more spiritually evolved, less petty. You frame your paralysis as magnanimity, your fear as wisdom, your powerlessness as strength. The narrative becomes, I could have retaliated, but I am better than that. This self-deception serves a protective function. It allows you to preserve your self-image while avoiding the terrifying prospect of genuine confrontation. You get to feel superior without having to risk anything, to claim moral victory while suffering actual defeat. The cost of this bargain only reveals itself gradually, as the gap between your public story and your private experience widens into a chasm. You feel it in the moments after staying silent when you needed to speak. The conversation ends, the person walks away, and you stand there replaying what just happened, composing in your mind all the things you could have said, should have said, would have said if only you were braver. Hours or days later, you are still thinking about it, still writing better versions of the encounter, still carrying the weight of your own cowardice. Each instance of swallowed truth adds to the accumulated store of bitterness. You begin keeping score, maintaining an internal ledger of every offense absorbed, every humiliation endured, every moment of disrespect you permitted. The list grows longer, the weight heavier, and beneath your practiced smile churns an ocean of unexpressed anger. You become two people, the compliant figure the world sees and the furious ghost that lives in your thoughts. The cycle feeds itself with ruthless efficiency. The more conflicts you avoid, the more resentment you accumulate. The more resentment you carry, the less capable you become of facing confrontation. Because now you have years of backed-up fury, threatening to explode if you open the valve, even slightly. You fear that if you start speaking your truth, everything will come pouring out in an uncontrolled flood. So you stay silent, and the pressure builds higher still. Some people spend entire lifetimes trapped in this pattern, defining themselves through their suffering. They become professional victims, wearing their accumulated grievances like medals of honor. They take pride in how much they endure, how gracefully they absorb mistreatment, how rarely they stoop to defending themselves. Their identity becomes inseparable from their wounds, and they cling to their resentment because releasing it would mean losing the story they have built about who they are. Yet there exists a way out of this prison, though the path requires dismantling everything you have been taught about virtue and strength. It demands reconnecting with a fundamental force that civilization has taught you to suppress, a basic drive that animates all living things. Every organism that exists possesses an inherent impulse to expand, to assert itself, to claim its place in the world. This is not aggression for its own sake, but the simple fact of life wanting to express itself fully. A seed does not apologize for breaking through the soil. A river does not hesitate to carve its channel through stone. A child does not question their right to exist before they learn shame. This primary life force flows through you as well, though years of conditioning have taught you to dam it up, redirect it, deny its legitimacy. Reclaiming this energy means unlearning the lessons that turned your vitality into a problem requiring management. The journey from powerlessness to self-possession unfolds through distinct stages, each representing a fundamental transformation in how you relate to your own existence. Picture first the spirit that has learned to carry burdens, that bends its back beneath the weight of others' expectations and commands. This enduring figure possesses a kind of strength, the strength of a beast of burden, but it is strength devoted entirely to service and submission. It carries what it is told to carry, travels where it is directed to travel, never questioning whether the load is rightfully its own. Most people live their entire lives in this state of dutiful servitude. They pride themselves on their capacity to bear whatever is placed upon them, to shoulder responsibility without complaint, to accommodate demands without resistance. They mistake this endurance for virtue, never recognizing that their strength serves only to maintain their own subjugation. The weight they carry with such determination includes many things that were never theirs to bear. But within this burdened spirit stirs the possibility of rebellion. Something begins to shift when the load becomes unbearable, when the cost of compliance finally exceeds the cost of refusal. In this moment of awakening, a different energy emerges, fierce and uncompromising. The submissive carrier transforms into something willing to bare its teeth, to defend its territory, to roar a singular word into the face of every demand, no. This transformation into a creature capable of refusal represents a crucial stage in reclaiming your existence. Learning to say no liberates space that has been occupied by the demands, expectations, and impositions of others. Every genuine refusal carves out territory where you can begin to discover who you actually are beneath the accumulated layers of compliance. Yet this defensive posture, necessary as it is, cannot be the final destination. A life spent only in opposition remains reactive, still defined by what it resists rather than what it creates. Beyond the stage of necessary rebellion lies a third possibility, a state of being that has moved past both submission and defiance. Imagine the spirit that has shed the weight of borrowed obligations and fought free of constraining demands, now turning its attention to creation rather than resistance. This liberated consciousness plays where it once struggled, invents where it once obeyed, chooses its commitments freely rather than inheriting them by default. It has earned the right to decide for itself what matters and what does not. The question that haunts this entire journey is deceptively simple. Who are you, really, underneath everything you have been taught to perform? Most people never discover the answer because they spend their lives playing parts written by others. You learned your lines early, absorbed the role expected of you, and performed it so consistently that you forgot you were acting. The character you present to the world, the one who nods and smiles and accommodates, may have almost nothing to do with the person you would be if you had grown up free. Think about how much of your life unfolds according to scripts you never agreed to follow. You chose your career path considering what would make your parents proud, what would impress your peers, what would provide security and status. You shaped your personality to avoid rejection, smoothing away the rough edges that might have made you interesting but difficult. You learned which opinions were safe to express and which should remain hidden, which desires were acceptable and which should be suppressed. Each compromise seemed small at the time, barely worth noticing. You adjusted your behavior slightly to avoid an argument. You swallowed a comment that might have caused tension. You agreed to something you did not want to do because refusing would have disappointed someone. These minor betrayals of your authentic self accumulated gradually, layer upon layer, until the original person beneath became impossible to locate. You wake up one day and realize you have no idea what you actually want, separate from what you have been conditioned to want. The fear of conflict plays a central role in this identity erosion. Every time you face a choice between speaking your truth and maintaining false harmony, you stand at a crossroads. One path leads toward authenticity and the other toward continued performance. The authentic path requires you to risk disapproval, to accept that some people will dislike what you have to say, to tolerate the discomfort of being genuinely seen. The performance path offers the familiar comfort of acceptance purchased through self-betrayal. Most people choose the performance path so consistently that they forget a choice exists. They tell themselves they are being considerate, mature, spiritually evolved. They do not recognize that they are slowly erasing themselves, that each avoided confrontation dilutes their identity a little more. You cannot know who you are without testing yourself against resistance, without discovering what you will defend when challenged, without finding the limits beyond which you will not bend. Conflict serves as the forge where identity takes shape. When you clash with the world, with other perspectives, with expectations that do not fit, you discover what matters to you beneath the conditioned reflexes. You learn what you actually believe when someone challenges your stated convictions. You find out what you genuinely value when forced to choose between competing goods. You uncover your real boundaries when someone attempts to violate them. Without this friction, without these moments of necessary opposition, you remain undefined, a collection of adaptive responses with no core. The person who never confronts anything never becomes anyone in particular. They exist as a blank space shaped by whatever forces happen to press upon them, forever molding themselves to fit the container rather than claiming a shape of their own. The invitation to become who you are carries no guarantee of comfort or security. It offers instead the possibility of living with integrity, of experiencing the rare coherence that comes when your inner reality matches your outer presentation. This alignment has become so unusual in modern life that most people would not recognize it if they encountered it. They have grown so accustomed to split between their public face and private self that unity seems impossible. Yet integrity remains achievable for those willing to pay its price. The cost is your willingness to disappoint people, to lose approval, to stand alone when your truth conflicts with collective comfort. You must be prepared to hear that you are difficult, unreasonable, selfish, problematic. You must develop the strength to absorb these judgments without immediately reshaping yourself to avoid them. You must learn to value your own self-respect more than the conditional acceptance others offer in exchange for your compliance. Here is what makes your silence particularly dangerous. It is never neutral. When you witness injustice and say nothing, when someone treats you poorly and you accept it without protest, when patterns of disrespect establish themselves and you allow them to continue, you are not simply keeping the peace. You are actively teaching the world how to treat you. You are training others that you will tolerate mistreatment, that your boundaries are negotiable, that your needs can be safely ignored. Every unspoken truth becomes permission for lies to flourish. Every unchallenged violation becomes precedent for future violations. The person who abuses your kindness learns that their behavior carries no consequences. The system that exploits your labor discovers that you will not resist. The relationship dynamics that diminish you become entrenched as normal. Your silence does not protect you from harm. It guarantees that harm will continue. This is not about adopting a posture of constant aggression or picking fights for sport. It concerns learning to recognize when confrontation serves life rather than merely venting frustration. Some conflicts are necessary because they defend something essential: your dignity, your boundaries, your right to exist on your own terms. These confrontations, uncomfortable as they may be, represent acts of self-affirmation rather than destruction. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. You will feel afraid when you finally speak the truth you have been suppressing. Your voice will shake when you draw a boundary for the first time. Your hands will tremble when you say no to a demand you would have previously accepted. The fear does not disqualify the action. Acting despite fear is precisely what courage means. The question you must ask yourself in moments of decision is brutally simple. Am I choosing silence because it serves my integrity? Or am I choosing silence because I am afraid? This question, answered honestly, cuts through all the sophisticated justifications you have constructed for your passivity. It reveals whether your restraint flows from genuine wisdom or simple cowardice. You were not designed to spend your life carrying burdens that belong to others. You contain within you the capacity for both fierce self-defense and creative freedom. You can learn to say no and mean it. You can discover what you actually value when you stop performing values borrowed from others. You can build a life that reflects your authentic nature rather than your conditioned responses. But this transformation requires action, and it requires that you begin immediately, in this moment, with whatever small act of self-assertion is available to you right now.